former patients with claims, benefiting the vendors. It's not bailing out private equity. So we had, I'm not going to mention names, but we had a state where we had a deal to maintain, to keep things going. There was going to be a private-public partnership, but it got pulled at the last minute because there was a fear that that state's government would be looking at, would be accused of bailing out private equity. Not bailing out private equity. The equity in both of our deals is so far underwater that nothing we could do would benefit the equity. But the regulators and the press, to that extent, just don't make that connection. That we're not bailing out the former owners, we're trying to make the best out of a very, very ugly situation. And the people who are benefiting are, and I'm not whining and talking about, I don't want to sound like I'm crying about this, giving me a hard time. I'm just saying it's a perception. So.
Should we talk about the OpCo-PropCo?
Yes, definitely. So a lot of healthcare, especially hospitals, are funded through sale-leasebacks, and there's an OpCo-PropCo structure. The PropCo is the property company, the real estate, and the OpCo is the operating healthcare entity. And that creates challenges, in addition to the regulatory challenges about a sale, it creates challenges when you're selling those assets, because the buyer looks at it together. Look at the bricks, the dirt, and the operating hospital as one asset. But when you have two owners, really, one owner on the real estate and one owner on the operations, it makes that complicated. You guys have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's tough, and the way to look at it, the way these leases are, it's a master lease that covers, all of your hospitals, right? And so there's not somebody that's going to come in and assume that lease and become the next steward or prospect, right?
Right.
Because you have to split this up and sell it to a bunch of different people, and so, we had to sort of rack our brains to try to figure out, okay, how do we address this lease? How do we get out of this big lease? How do we break it apart? How do we, sell our hospitals and maximize value without having the landlord, take all the value? And it's, the sale process is challenging, right? We talked about the regulators playing a huge role and people knowing they have to make them happy. And we have buyers saying, well, who should I be talking to? Should I be talking to you?
Right.
Or should I be talking to the landlord? Because I also need a new lease, and I want to buy the land. And so that was really challenging. And, the landlords are economic animals, right? They've got these rights, they've designed these leases this way for a certain reason, so they're not really going to give an inch until you, put some pressure on them. And we tried every which way to do that. Looking at things like, recharacterizing the leases as financing or even equity. We actually ended up rejecting our leases while we were in 11 and still operating the hospitals. Right? Think about that. And saying, okay, we're going to be in your hospital, come kick us out if you want to, after we rejected the lease. And we even got really creative and said, well, we're going to recharacterize your lease as a financing, and actually we still own the land, and we're going to sell your land under 363F, and so you have a disputed interest in the property, which I know. Didn't make Emil happy. He's like, this is America, you can't sell my land for me. But that's what it took. To try to create some pressure.
You're forced to make these creative arguments and go out on a limb because of the exigencies and because Chapter 11 doesn't really translate well to these cases. So the Chapter 11 lease provisions that require that you assume a lease fully, right? You can't separate it. They've got to start making payments soon after filing. Those things that make sense for retail cases don't really fit into these cases and these types of arrangements. So this is one area where we benefited from the ground that you went through before. So we, after some, some back and forth, we worked out a deal with our ground lessor to basically become partners and not worrying about allocating value to the real estate as opposed to the operations, which is a difficult test, because no buyer is going to say, I'm buying a hospital for $1 and I'm buying a dirt for $1.50. They see it as one unitary asset. So we worked out a deal where we shared in the total sale proceeds. It didn't matter whether it was real estate or the operations. That's something we learned from watching you guys.
Yeah. No, I mean, for us, again, it took bringing all that pressure to bear, and then in combination with bringing a massive group of people together through mediation. We had, again, 30 hospitals in 8 states. We had 14 different buyers. We had the landlord, we had a creditors committee, we had multiple sets of secured lenders. We had the lenders to the landlord, right? Because the property that the landlord owned were underwater. So we had at any given time, 12 people to try to cut this global deal to save these hospitals. And Judge Israel here, he was the mediator in all of it. He was masterful at bringing everybody together, because this was just a massive real world problem that I don't think there had been a case like this. I know there hadn't been a case like this before where we had to figure out how to solve it. And it really took everybody just devoting an incredible amount of time, thoughtfulness, and ultimately reaching concessions with the help of Judge Israel to save the system.
These cases are made complicated by the fact that you have all those constituents who are like in the case constituents. But you have other constituents like regulators, patients, doctors, that you have to deal with who are not the typical case constituents. Okay? So in these cases, that complicates it. And so one of my partners, who is not a bankruptcy lawyer, said, hey, how's that prospect case going? And I said, I wake up every morning and there's a catastrophe that I didn't anticipate the day before. I've got to run around all day and try and solve it. And then the next morning I wake up and there's another one. So that's what these cases, because of the complications, because of the risk, that's what they do. And I'm sure you had the same experience.
That's why we're in a support group together.
And it kind of dovetails into some of the wind down and compliance risks that are faced. I know on Stewart we had millions forecasted in the budget just for medical records retention, things like that.
Yeah, I'd say that these are not easy businesses to wind down, right? Most Chapter 11 cases, you get to a sale, right? You do your 363, the operation is sort of off your books, and you try to wind it up in a nice and tidy way. That was really hard in Stewart. I think two things happened. One, you alluded to it. Once they realize you're not the hospital anymore, the insurance companies just cut you off.
Right.
I mean, it's really remarkable that they say, there's a sort of giant cat and mouse game, I think, that goes on all the time between the hospital operators and the private insurance companies. And, they're always kind of playing games with each other, but they're always able to settle up to keep the business relationship going. The second that you sell a hospital and you're no longer an operator, that accounts receivable that's on your book, that's good for actual medical services provided, if the check's not coming anymore.
You have to threaten. Then you got to threaten with litigation, you got to threaten to drag into court, because they just stop paying. And, insurance companies love doing that. They love taking advantage of their greater,
The balance sheet.
and they'll just hold it back. So as soon as they know you're not operating anymore, and most of these deals, right, the AR doesn't go with the buyer. Okay, the AR stays behind.
Can you guys expand on more countermeasures for when that happens?
Yeah, you got to go after them. You got to threaten to drag them into court. You got to be ready to sue them. You got to, top of them much more aggressively than in most situations, because they are there, they're playing the delay game, hoping you get more desperate, so you cut a bigger,
Yeah.
discount.
Yeah, so Stewart right now is in probably a dozen arbitrations with the estate is in probably a dozen arbitrations with, every major insurance company in the country to
And then-
collect
and
on
then-
insurance.
And then while you're in arrears for your AR, do you borrow against them? Do you lien? Do you?
No, I mean, you can, but that's really expensive, and you're trying to avoid, this is when you're in the wind down stage, and you're trying to wind down those assets, not in operations, and that's when they start choking you.
I see.
And,
I see.
One other thing that's complicated, people don't realize, and David said, you typically sell a company in asset operations in 363. You've got some minimal, transition service, but then it's done quickly. Here, in these deals, it is so much more complicated. For example, the electronic medical records, right, that are now, they're federally mandated. Like, it'll take 6 to 12 months just to transfer those from one system to another, okay? And you've got an obligation to maintain them, and you need those records to fit. It is so much more complicated.
The TSA organization, right?
Yes.
We sold all our hospitals. We still had an employee base of 700 people just to help transition the hospitals to the buyers. The buyers already owned them, but just to keep the better record of the systems, the AR collection, and to help them. And so when the insurance companies began to cut the company off and choke it from AR, we were still responsible for servicing, the 28 hospitals that we had sold.
And by that time, your lenders are gone. They don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, the lenders are like, we don't care anymore, you don't have an operating hospital, so we'll actually foreclose.
Right.
Whereas we were too scared to do so before, now we'll put the pressure on you, and so.
Okay, we have to stop. We're standing between people in the bar.
Oh, exactly.
Any questions? We'll be inside.